The last thing Ren Yizhou remembered before waking up in a stranger's body was the cold splash of coffee on his laptop keyboard, the blue screen of death blinking at him like a disappointed parent, and the very specific, soul-destroying horror of realizing he had not saved his manuscript in 4 hours. Then there was a bus. He did not see it coming. He opened his eyes to a ceiling painted the soft ivory of old money, to the weight of silk sheets against unfamiliar skin, and to the very clear, very vivid memory of having read a boy's love web novel called The General's Obsession approximately 347 times over the past 2 years. He sat up slowly. The room around him was exactly as described in Chapter 2 of the novel. Mahogany furniture, oil paintings of horses, a window overlooking a courtyard where plum trees were in full ridiculous bloom. He knew this room. He had read every sentence about this room. He had written fan theories about this room. He was in it. No. He said to no one in particular. His voice came out wrong, too soft, too young. He scrambled to the bronze mirror on the vanity table and stared at the face looking back at him. Mo Jinshin, second young master of the Mo household, age 17. Described in the novel exactly once, in a single throwaway line during Chapter 4, the second young master of the Mo family stood near the garden wall. Unremarkable in every way. That was it. That was his entire existence in the canon story. One sentence. One adjective. Unremarkable. He pressed his forehead to the cool surface of the mirror and breathed. He was not the protagonist. He was not the love interest. He was not even a proper supporting character. He was furniture. He was the literary equivalent of a potted plant that happened to be standing in the corner of a scene that mattered to someone else. This was fine. This was actually fine. Because he knew exactly how the General's obsession was supposed to go. The protagonist, Wei Shuming, a beautiful, sharp-tongued young scholar from a fallen noble family, to catch the eye of General Liang Junhao within the next 3 chapters. They would argue constantly, misunderstand each other spectacularly, save each other's lives in increasingly dramatic ways, and finally confess their feelings during a battle sequence in Chapter 41 that had made Ren Yizhou coolly cry at 2 in the morning more times than he cared to admit. It was a wonderful story. He loved it deeply. He had no intention of interfering with it. His plan was simple: survive. Stay in the background. Do not accidentally alter any plot points. Drink tea, attend family dinners, and wait patiently for the story to end so he could figure out what had happened to his actual body and whether there was some kind of transmigration return policy he could take advantage of. He took a deep breath, straightened the unfamiliar collar of his robes, and told himself this was manageable. He had, as it would turn out, dramatically underestimated General Liang Junhao. The autumn imperial examination banquet was exactly as the novel had described it. Too many candles, too much silk, and enough political tension to make the air feel thick. Ren Yizhou sat at a table near the back, near the wall, near the garden entrance, exactly where a background character should sit, and quietly ate his roasted chestnuts and watched the story begin to unfold. There was Wei Shuming across the room, sharp-eyed and beautiful in deliberately understated robes, already trading barbed pleasantries with a court official twice his age and winning. Ren Yizhou watched him with the fond recognition of someone watching a beloved actor perform a scene they had memorized. He's going to say something cutting in about 30 seconds, he thought. Then he'll reach for his wine cup with his left hand because he's nervous, even though he won't show it. Wei Shuming said something cutting, reached for his wine cup. Left-hand Ren Yizhou felt a deeply strange, deeply private joy. He was watching his favorite story happen in real time. This was extraordinary. This was the single most remarkable thing that had ever happened to anyone, and he was choosing to observe it from a safe distance like a well-behaved museum. Visitor. He was so absorbed in watching Wei Shuming that he did not notice the moment the banquet doors opened and the room shifted, that particular social shift, like a tide turning, that happens when someone important enters a space. He noticed when a shadow fell across his table. He looked up. General Liang Junhao was looking directly at him. This was wrong. This was extremely wrong. In the novel, the general entered the banquet in Chapter 4. Spent 2 paragraphs being described as devastatingly handsome and quietly dangerous. Then crossed the room to accidentally on purpose encounter Wei, shumming near the scholar's plum painting display. He did not stop at background character tables. He had never, in 347 readings, stopped at a background character table. The general was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not aggressive about it, simply a fact of existence. He had the kind of face that historical dramas spent 3 episodes building up to, all strong lines and quiet intensity. Eyes the dark brown of river water in winter. He was wearing military dress, despite the civilian occasion, which the novel had noted was a deliberate power statement. And he was currently looking at Ren Yizhou with an expression of focused, unreadable attention, the general said. Ren Yizhou looked behind himself. There was a wall. He looked back at the general. Me. You were watching Scholar Wei. This was a trap. Some kind of social trap that he was completely unprepared for because this conversation did not exist in the novel. I was simply observing the room. I have an interest in social dynamics. Something shifted in the general's expression. Not quite amusement. More like the careful recalibration of someone who had expected one kind of answer and received another. Social dynamics, he repeated. It's a fascinating gathering. Mo Jinshin was not a question. The general knew his name, which was remarkable given that he was a footnote. Second son of Minister Mo. Yes, sit with me. Ren Yizhou stared at him. I am very comfortable here. I am not asking. No. But his voice was not unkind. It was the tone of someone who gave commands so naturally that the commands themselves had forgotten how to be harsh. This was absolutely not in the novel. Ren Yizhou looked across the room at Wei Shuming, who was supposed to be the general's entire focal point for the next 37 chapters. Wei Shuming was currently arguing with a court painter about brushwork. Technique appeared to be winning. Ren Yizhou stood up. Because one did not tell General Liang Junhao no at an imperial banquet, and followed the most important character in his favorite story to a table near the center of the room, feeling like a very confused extra who had wandered onto the wrong set. The problem, Ren Yizhou discovered over the following weeks, was that General Liang Junhao had apparently decided he was interesting. It was baffling. It was cosmically inconvenient. It went against everything he understood about narrative, structure, and romantic story logic. The general sent a message the day after the banquet, requesting his opinion on a matter of regional trade governance, which was so far outside anything Ren Yizhou had expected that he sat in his study for a full hour before drafting a careful. Because he had spent 2 years reading historical romance novels and actually absorbing the political commentary in the background. And apparently that knowledge was going to be weaponized against him now. The general sent another message 3 days later. Then another. Then he appeared in person at a poetry gathering that Ren Yizhou had only attended because it was in the same chapter as a scene he wanted to observe. And somehow the general ended up walking beside him in the garden for 40 minutes while discussing irrigation policy and the philosophical tension between military pragmatism and Confucian idealism. Was the best conversation Ren Yizhou had ever had in either of his lives. He hated that it was the best conversation he'd ever had. He was a background character. He was not supposed to be having formative intellectual experiences with the male lead of a boys' love novel. You don't say what you actually mean the first time, the general observed one afternoon. When they were walking along the river path after a court ceremony that the novel had described in Chapter 7, you offer something adjacent to it and wait to see how it's received. Ren Yizhou almost tripped on a root. I don't know what you mean. That, the general said, with something that was almost satisfaction, is exactly what I mean. Rained. They stood under the same overhang, close enough that Ren Yizhou could feel the warmth radiating off the general's arm, watch the river go silver with falling water. He was so aware of the proximity that he forgot to breathe evenly for about 30 seconds. This was a problem. He had not come to this story to develop feelings for the protagonist's love interest. He had come to observe from a safe distance and hopefully not die a second time. Feelings were a complication. Feelings were the kind of narrative deviation that ended badly for background characters who stepped into storylines that weren't theirs. He thought about Wei Shuming, about the beautiful, devastating love story that was supposed to unfold between Wei Shuming and Liang Junhao. He had cried over that story. He believed in that story. It was a piece of art, and he was standing in the way of it. "General," he said carefully, "there is a scholar named Wei Shuming." Pause. "I know who Wei Shuming is. He's remarkable. If you attended the next court poetry exhibition, he's likely to be present. His work is extraordinary." The general looked at him with an expression Ren Yizhou could not fully parse. "Why are you recommending people to me?" I simply thought he stopped. He did not have a convincing way to finish that sentence that did not involve admitting he had read a novel about the general's future romantic life. Mo Jinshin. The general's voice was quiet. "When we speak, do you listen to me? Of course, do you find it dull?" "Never," he said, before he could stop himself. The rain fell. The general looked at the river. "Then I don't need to be redirected toward Wei Shuming," he said. "Whatever you are trying to arrange," Ren Yizhou pressed. His lips together and stared at the middle distance and told himself very firmly that he was not allowed to feel hopeful about this. He started keeping notes, not out of any scholarly intention, but because the story he was living in had begun to diverge from the text he had memorized. And the divergence was accelerating. Chapter 8. Wei Shuming's altercation with the Third Prince's faction at the public court debate. In the novel, the general had intervened, drawing public attention to Wei Shuming and beginning the slow arc of the scholar's awareness that he was being watched. In the version Ren Yizhou witnessed, the general intervened, but he had spent the preceding hour sitting beside Ren Yizhou in the observer's gallery, leaning close enough to murmur observations in his ear, and the intervention felt less like the beginning of a grand romantic narrative, and more like an aside from someone who had already decided where his attention lived. Chapter 9. The Night Hunt. This was supposed to be the general and Wei Shuming's first moment of genuine vulnerability, a dangerous moment in the forest, a fire, confessions made to the dark. Ren Yizhou had taken extreme care to position himself far away from the hunt's route. He had gone the other direction entirely. He had felt virtuous about it. The general had followed him, not deliberately at least. Ren Yizhou didn't think so, because surely no one was dramatic enough to deviate from an imperial hunt to follow a footnote through the forest. But a wild boar had scattered both their parties, and they had ended up at the same clearing by what felt like the universe's very pointed sense of humor. And they had sat by a fire until dawn. They talked. They did not talk about anything momentous. They talked about calligraphy and the best, a way to preserve persimmons, and whether the northern border policy was sustainable given the changing weather patterns. The fire burned low. At some point, Ren Yizhou had stopped feeding it, and the general had taken over without comment. And the transfer of small domestic responsibility felt so intimate that Ren Yizhou had to look away. "Do you miss your home?" the general asked, very late, when the night was at its darkest. Ren Yizhou considered the question. His home was a different world, an apartment with a leaking faucet and a laptop graveyard of abandoned manuscripts. He missed it the way you miss a song you've forgotten most of the words to, the feeling of it, but not the sharp grief of specific loss. "I miss the version of it I understood," he said carefully. "I feel more uncertain now. Of what? Of where I belong in the order of things." "Oh?" The general was quiet. "Then you belong where you are. That's a tautology, perhaps." He could hear the faint warmth in the general's voice. "But most true things are." Ren Yizhou looked at the dying fire and thought about the story as it was supposed to go, and the story as it was going, and the distance between the two that he seemed to have caused simply by existing in the wrong place and being, apparently, the wrong kind of interesting. He thought about Wei Shuming, who deserved his story, who was, by every metric of narrative justice, supposed to be sitting beside this fire instead of him. He thought, "I have to fix this." He tried harder to redirect. He was subtle about it. He thought he was subtle. He mentioned Wei Shuming in conversation whenever organic opportunities arose. He praised the scholar's political writing where he knew the general's advisors would repeat the praise. He arranged himself to be unavailable on the days when, according to the novel's timeline, meaningful encounters were supposed to occur. The general adapted around every single obstacle with the unhurried patience of someone who had won long campaigns by simply outlasting resistance. "You're avoiding me," the general said one afternoon. Finding Ren Yizhou in the Imperial Library in a section so remote and dusty that no reasonable person would come looking for him. "I am researching water management records. You've been in this section for 2 hours. These records are from 300 years ago. I am thorough." The general sat down across from him at the reading table with the ease of someone who had decided this was where he lived now. He picked up the scroll Ren Yizhou had been pretending to read and examined it with genuine attention. The southern canal systems were more sophisticated than people remember, he observed. This drainage model, we could apply a version of it to the flooding issues in Bailu province. Despite everything, Ren Yizhou felt his attention sharpen with genuine interest. The elevation differential would need adjustment. The northern terrain has a different, he caught himself. He set down his own scroll. "You are not actually here to discuss water management." "I am. Also, I wanted to see you," he said it without embarrassment, as though it were simply an accurate report of fact. "You have been absent. I have been occupied." Mo Jinshin. The general's voice was gentle in a way that somehow made it harder to look at him. "If I have done something to cause offense, I would prefer to know." "You haven't? Then why are you building walls?" He felt the question land somewhere it wasn't supposed to, and stayed quiet for a moment. Watching dust drift through the column of light from the high library window, then he said, because the honest answer required less maintenance than the invented one, "I am concerned that I am disrupting something important." What could you possibly be disrupting? He could not explain the novel. He could not say, "You are supposed to fall in love with Wei Shuming. It is the greatest love story I have ever read, and I refuse to be the reason it doesn't happen." He could not say, "I am nobody. I am a footnote." "I have no business being the person you spend your time with," he said. "You are the most important figure in the court. Your attention shapes things. What you choose to care about, it matters. I am concerned that what you are choosing is not," he struggled for the word, "optimal." A long silence. The general looked at him with that unreadable expression he had, the one that felt like being seen all the way through. "You think I am making a mistake," he said. "By spending time with you, I think there are people who would benefit more from your attention. You have assigned yourself the task of determining who those people are. That's not what he exhaled. "I'm trying to be responsible." "Responsible," the general repeated, and something in his voice had shifted, not cold, not angry, but with the weight of someone setting down something he'd been carrying carefully. "Mo Jinshen. What if I told you that I have not felt this at ease with another person in years? That conversations with you are the part of my days I carry with me. That the reason I keep finding where you are is not because I am unaware of what I am doing, but because I am entirely aware, and I have decided it is worth the effort." Ren Yizhou looked at the table. His hands were flat on the old wood. "I would say," he said, very quietly, "that you might be confused about what you want. I am 31 years old. I have led armies through 3 campaigns. I am not confused about what I want." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you afraid of?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer honestly. The honest answer was, "I am afraid that I am not real. I am afraid that I am a borrowed body in someone else's story, and that caring about you is the most irresponsible thing I could do. Because when this story ends, whatever that means, I might simply stop existing. And you will have wasted something precious on nothing," he said instead. "Give me time." And the general, who had the patience of long campaigns and winter sieges, said, "All right." He found Wei Shuming in the Scholar's Garden 2 days later. Not deliberately, the Scholar's Garden was along the path Ren Yizhou used to reach the Eastern Library, and Wei Shuming was simply there, practicing brushwork on a low table. His calligraphy, the kind of controlled elegance that spoke of years of discipline Ren Yizhou had intended to walk past. He really had. "You're the one General Liang keeps talking about," Wei Xiaoming said. Without looking up from his brush, he stopped. "I beg your pardon?" "Mo Jinshen, second son of Minister Mo." Wei Xiaoming set down his brush and looked up with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who had long since decided that social niceties were less efficient than observation. "He mentioned you 3 times at the court assembly last month. People are starting to notice." Ren Yizhou felt something cold settle in his chest. This was the opposite of what he had intended. We have had occasion to speak." "I know." Wei Xiaoming looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has assessed a situation and found it entirely different from what they expected. "I also know that you have been trying to redirect his attention toward me." He couldn't speak for a moment. "How you recommended my poetry collection to his second aide, which you knew would reach him.